Thank you so much, Rector Mogherini, and thank you for your driving determination on this issue. The Iran nuclear deal demonstrated the transatlantic community's ability to affect change on the global stage. But it was one of many such agreements and initiatives over the years that were brought into force because of the engagement and creative thinking in the EU-US relationship.
As we heard over the last 2 days, the history of the EU-US relationship is built on creative problem solving, always with our shared interests and values at the heart. The European Union itself was a creative solution to a problem. The European coal and steel community, the origin of the EU, was founded on the belief that an economic union of key industries would bring peace to a continent that had been torn apart by 2 world wars. It was a new project, unheard of in history. And now, 70 years later, the European Union is vibrant, peaceful, and prosperous. Today, the Union is writing the rules of the game in a number of sectors. We've heard about some of them this week, including digital policy, the green transition, and trade.
Thank you, Denise. We forget so much that this European Union is a peace project. The EU is now a partner of first resort for the United States. But that doesn't mean that the relationship can't grow to be more effective. We won't sugarcoat it. The EU is complex. And there are benefits to that complexity for sure. But if you're not familiar with the European Union, or you don't encounter the institutions on a regular basis, the interwoven webs of the European Commission, the European Council, the Council of the European Union, the European Parliament, not to mention the member state politics, it can be dizzying. Well, it is possible that that's intimidating. It can be confusing, but at the same time, we all know that it isn't values and institutions and treaties alone that bind us. Rather, it is the stories we shared, the people we met, the challenges we overcame together, and the common aspirations we hold on both sides of the Atlantic.
We were curious to see if this message resonated with Americans outside of the DC bubble, with Americans who do not interact with the EU on a daily basis, not as an actor in the high politics of international affairs, but rather because of their job or their colleagues in Madrid, Vienna, Stockholm, as consumers of everyday products from Europe on their grocery store shelves, as business leaders seeking opportunities, customers, suppliers in Europe's internal market, as the source of a family tradition or a heritage connection, or simply because of that pop-up while shopping online, asking them to agree to a vendor's cookie policies. So as part of the inaugural EU-US Future Forum, the Atlantic Council organized a series of focus groups in locations across the United States to ask these questions. This project was supported by the EU delegation to the US as a part of its effort to improve understanding of the EU and how it functions across the United States.
Our team traveled virtually, if you will, to Michigan, to Oregon, to Florida, and to Indiana. We organized these sessions with local voices that represented a wide range of sectors and levels of familiarity with the European Union to ask them, how do they see Europe? How do they see this union from where they stand? How does the US-EU relationship impact their lives?
As we concluded these groups, we worked with Morning Consult to find some quantitative data asking these same questions and to compare it to the anecdotes and interactions we had in our focus group sessions. Here to present the findings are Benjamin Haddad, Director of the Europe Center, and Kyle Dropp, co-founder and president of Morning Consult.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Haddad, the director of the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council. And this is a conversation on presenting the EU seen from the US. For the last few months, we, in partnership with the EU delegation to the United States, have conducted conversations, focus groups with Americans all across the country. We've partnered with the University of Michigan, with the University of Florida, World Oregon, the World Affairs Council of Seattle and Alaska, as well as with our Millennium Leadership Fellow, Pete Seat in Indiana, to talk about how the European Union is seen in the United States. More recently, we partnered with Morning Consult, a data intelligence company that conducts millions of interviews every day on a wide range of topics coming from politics, social issues, or economics. I'm joined today for a conversation to preview the results of this consultation by Dr. Kyle Dropp, who is the co-founder and president of Morning Consult. I should say that we'll spend some time talking about both the data that Morning Consult has gathered over the last few days, but also some of the things that we heard in the conversations and the focus groups across the country. This is a preview to a paper that we will soon release on how the EU is perceived by Americans and concrete, prescriptions to sort of improve the understanding of the European Union among Americans. And we'll also bring to you in the next few weeks some of the voices that we've heard in those focus groups. But first, let me turn to you, Cal, so that you can run us through the results of the questions that Morning Consult has asked lots of Americans.
Wonderful to be here. And hi, Ben. We're tracking what adults globally think of the 50 largest economies, along with Europe and the European Union, of course. And so I have some brand new findings that I'd like to share here. And if we could go to slide 2 on the screen right here, I'm going to walk you through some of the highlights. So there's 2 main takeaways on this slide right here. So this is showing views toward the EU among Americans. That's this green line, and it updates every single week. And the 2 takeaways are: 1, views toward the EU are positive and consistently positive going back to the start of the year. I would also highlight that EU favorability is on par with that of Israel and South Korea, 2 generally positively viewed partners of ours. And if you really break it down, about half of Americans have a positive view of the EU, about 20% have a negative view, and Democrats, for example, have a much more positive view. That's the main highlight I wanted from this slide, Ben.
Yeah, and I know we're going to dive into some of the details on the partisan divides and the issues that are more at the forefront for some of the people that you talk to. But I should say that this really confirms also the tone of the conversations that we've had. We've heard from Democrats and Republicans a positive perception of Europe, of the European Union, and the transatlantic relationship. Something that struck me is hearing people who worked in the healthcare in Indiana, for example, say that the pandemic had even heightened the sense of the importance of the EU as a partner, and that maybe many lives could have been saved if the US and the EU had worked together against COVID-19. But at the same time, we've also heard some concerns and some differences over defense spending or trade. And I'm sure we'll get back to this a little more into detail in the next 3 slides.
Absolutely. And if you go back to slide 2, I know that I wanted to highlight a few things on sort of the main impression of Europeans toward the US. And this is one of the most shocking, if not striking, findings that we've seen over the past 2 years. When COVID started, we were seeing changes in public opinion in weeks that usually took years to manifest. But the US has seen significant gains among Europeans. The yellow line, for example, shows that from January to the present, there's been about a 50-point gain in terms of what Germans think of the United States. And that same thing applies also for what French adults think of the United States, and also what a range of other European adults think. If I so say, across the G20, every single country now has a better view of the United States today compared with 6 months ago, with the exception of China, Ben.
Yeah, and that really, I think, corresponds also to the conversation we've had over the last 3 days in our EU-US Future Forum. A lot of hope and optimism over the possibilities of what we can, the transatlantic policies we can shape on a wide array of topics, but at the same time, some concerns on some disagreements that have not, of course, disappeared with the election, but at least optimism and trust that start to be rebuilt.
Absolutely. And, I think if you would go to slide 6, I know that China is on a lot of people's minds. So what are some of the attitudes of Europeans and Americans toward China? What this figure shows is a combination of tens of thousands of interviews we've conducted across the world on one simple question: do you have a favorable or unfavorable view of China? On the first line, about 18% of Americans have a positive view. More than 60%, in fact, have a negative view. And that sort of negative view is shared in the United Kingdom. It's also shared in many countries in Europe. Adults in Italy and Spain tend to have a slightly more positive view. If you look among Americans, the final thing I'd say, Ben, is party drives a lot of considerations. Both Democrats and Republicans have a negative view of China, but it's felt much more acutely among Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've heard China being brought up in a lot of the conversation in the focus groups. Of course, a lot of Americans, Democrats or Republicans, see the EU as a potential strong partner when it comes to addressing some of Chinese behavior, whether on human rights or on trade policy, on security and defense issues. I would say that was really one of the issues that would come forth the most. And clearly, there was a sense that the EU was a strong ally. I heard a businessman in Indiana, said it's not in the U.S. interest if the EU falls apart. But at the same time, I would say we also heard, especially from Republican voices in Michigan, but also in Indiana, some criticism over the lack of defense spending coming from the European Union. I remember someone saying, I would give the EU an A when it comes to trade, but a C- when it comes to defense spending. So we know that these issues are still lingering, but clearly more common interests are being expressed.
Oh, absolutely. And I know another part of the polling that we did together, if you were to go to slide 7, we're looking at a lot of opportunities for US and EU partnership. So we asked a very simple question: what is the most important way in which the EU and the US can partner? And I'd say the two key kind of findings in my view on this figure, the most adults in America say they should partner on security and defense. We can talk about the interpretation of this. Maybe NATO comes up a little bit when people are thinking of Europe. Fully a quarter of Americans say on climate and the environment. That one stood out to me. And I guess if you look a little bit down, you have advancing human rights, 16%, promoting democracy, 7%. Only about 3% of Americans say the best and most important way for the EU and US to partner is around digital privacy rights. So that one really stood out to me. And we also have some really nice demographic breakouts that perhaps we can walk through in a second. But any thoughts on that, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is really interesting. First, on climate and the environment, we've heard students in Oregon or in Florida mention this and compare the green transition that is being put forward by the European Commission with the Green New Deal and the agenda today in Washington. That's something that came up very often. On advancing human rights, we heard a human rights activist in Michigan praise the work that the EU is doing, for example, on banning the death penalty across the world, including in the United States, but also raise concerns on some issues related to diversity and racism, and saying that maybe Europe still had work to do, especially compared to the debate that the United States is going through. On trade, I think we heard sometimes some very contradictory things in our conversations. Some people in the agricultural sector, talking about protectionism and being quite critical, actually, of the EU markets, while others, saying it's much easier to deal with the EU as a common integrated single market than as a bunch of smaller isolated markets. So a lot of really interesting conversation, I think, there, and some understanding of what the EU is doing on privacy rights, especially on GDPR. But sometimes, especially from business voices, I would say we heard some negative and critical comments. So that was very interesting too.
Absolutely. And to build on that, if you were to go ahead to slide 8, we took that same question about the best way for the EU and the US to partner, and we broke it down by generations and by parties. And this one is quite striking to me. We're interviewing millions of Gen Z, younger adults in America, and their view toward just about everything is quite different from boomers. And that is the case here. For example, I would point out that adults under 35, many of them say that the partnership should focus on advancing human rights, 25%, compared with only a few senior adults. And then if you looked at Democrats versus Republicans, Democrats are 3 times as likely to say that the EU and the US should partner with respect to the environment. And then on the flip side, Republicans are twice as likely as Democrats to talk about security and defense. So there's myriad differences in terms of what people think the proper relationship should be. That is what average Americans think should be the proper relationship and engagement for the EU. And I should also note that, you know, we're tracking this in all the economies, so we could also compare that in the follow-up paper or for future conversations, Ben.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And you know, I think, to be blunt, that should remind us that we also started this work, obviously, under a very different administration that sometimes had a hostile rhetoric towards the European Union. And our purpose in doing this exercise was precisely to ask ourselves, you know, how can we talk about the transatlantic relationship and the relationship with the European Union to broader spectrums of Americans and Europeans beyond our respective beltways of Washington, D.C., Brussels, and national capitals? How do we make sure that it resonates into daily lives, that it strikes at the hearts of the interest and values of the wider groups? And so I think the way you break it down here between Republicans and Democrats shows that there's clearly areas of convergence and cooperation with both political parties.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent with everything we're doing in polling. Some of the most interesting projects we run compare what more influential or Americans with a higher level of resources compare with average Americans. And obviously you want everybody to be on your side, but sometimes you see huge differences across the board. So we're grateful for the partnership with the Atlantic Council, and we think we'll hopefully continue to advance the understanding of all of these key topics. If I could put a plug in too, I mean, we of course also have other good information on views toward world leaders around the globe, key threats all around the world, including EU. And so, I'm excited to continue the conversation.
Yeah, advance the understanding. That's what Secretary Albright said on the first day in the opening of the conference, is to improve the understanding of the European Union. This is why we conducted all these conversations. And let's be honest, we saw that there's still a lot of work to be done to explain even how the European Union functions. That's something that needs to be done on both sides of the Atlantic, I would say, but we'll continue to be doing it here at the Atlantic Council in the coming months and years. Cal, thank you so much. This is really interesting. And once again, as I said, it's only a preview, and we'll be releasing more of this data and the excerpts of our conversation in the coming months in a paper and another public conversation. Thank you.
Hey, privileged to be here, and talk to you soon.